Hello and welcome back to Talking Insights. I'm your host, Shrika Govindaraju, and throughout the series, we're taking a closer look at the key topics of today, taking a step beyond the world of research and insights to tackle the big issues of our time. And I'd like to start this episode by thanking all of you, our listeners, for supporting and listening to the show during the past year. It's been an absolute pleasure for me to bring you these discussions with interesting thought leaders from the research space and beyond from all over the world. We've been looking at topics as varied as video games and conspiracies, diversity and artificial intelligence. And I do hope you'll join us again through 2021 as we continue to highlight how research has the power to shape our society. This week's episode is sponsored by Confirmit. Confirmit solutions are built by insights professionals for insights professionals. Market research, customer experience, and employee engagement consultants around the world rely on Confirmit solutions to turn insight into stories that fuel action. The heart of Confirmit's business is the people behind this technology, who work as a partner to develop the flexibility and power you need to understand and manage experiences, emotions, and behaviors, so you're always one step ahead. Find out more about Confirmit by clicking the link in the episode description. Storytelling has been a part of human progress from the dawn of our species. Long before the written word, stories were how our ancestors communicated ideas and values, information and insight. Stories educated, they warned, they launched inquiry, and they molded civilization as it progressed through the ages. Today, our society deals mainly in data, raw numbers and statistics, which seem a long way from the humanity and warmth of stories. But what if there was a way to combine the two? What if data could inform storytelling using insights and analytics and the power of human creativity in unison? Today, we explore how Confirmit have leveraged storytelling as a means to provide better insights in the age of data. And we look at the past, present, and possible future for storytelling in the world of research. I'm delighted today to be joined by Alexander Skorka from Confirmit, Managing Director of Confirmit for the DACH region and Product Manager of Dapresi. Alexander is an expert in information visualization and delivery, developing an early system for automating presentations, and he has a deep knowledge of visual storytelling, infographic design, writing, and data-powered decision-making in marketing. Alexander, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, brother, for having me.
It's a pleasure, and it's a really interesting topic that we've picked up on here, which the work that you do at Confirmit as well, because I think, as you said in the introduction, we're used to thinking of data as data and stories as stories. And from your point of view, where did this idea of using the skills or the structures of storytelling to convey ideas in a business context first begin?
Well, that's really hard to say, but at least I came across storytelling 10 years ago when I started to think of how to best implement storytelling in the market research world. However, looking back 30 years, maybe, and we don't want to talk too long about the past, but I think it's good to get some context. So in the beginning, when I started my career, market research provided results in text form, very well articulated. So these were really written reports. Yeah. And of course, they were very descriptive. And of course, they focused on the most relevant facts, but they were about explaining and interpreting the results. So it was some kind of story, even 30 years ago. However, then we all know PowerPoint was introduced and market research started to visualize most data collected. So I would say, the table book became visual. And, that led to a situation where basically the reports became a long deck of slides and sometimes even, really one question per slide visualized in a chart, and which led, of course, to very comprehensive decks. And as you probably know, comprehensiveness is sometimes the enemy of being compelling. So I think that is where we now ended up that in most cases, people require, and especially the customers of market research, they require a really focused story because, we are all under time pressure. We need to process so much information. And this is why we can't read entire books, so to say. We want to look for specific information and we want to get answers on the fly when they pop up. So I think this is where now it's time, so to say, to get back a little bit to the roots and consider We need in the end to tell a good report and which is basically a good story in the end, hopefully.
And so before we move to this kind of storytelling approach, you mentioned, so that was how it originally was, and then we went into this period of, PowerPoints, and I guess, many listeners and yourself and myself have all experienced those seemingly never-ending slideshows where it's just one piece of information after the next. And when you were working in that era as well, did you find that, was it easier or was it more difficult to convey these insights that you were gathering from all this research that you were doing? Was there already a sign back then that, hey, maybe just putting all this into a 50 slide long deck isn't very interesting for our clients, as well as for ourselves to actually make it?
I would say it depends, of course, on the customers we talk to. And I think in the past, there were on both sides, so to say, so on the agency side, but also on the enterprise side, there were market researchers. And of course, market researchers, they know about data, they know about analytics, they love the detail. They are researchers, so they are really interested in all the details. However, during the last couple of years, I think the target audience changed. So more and more consumers of market research are related to marketing or product management. So this is where I think we need to be more precise in looking at what we really want to present as market researchers. And it's more related in the end to a specific business question someone in marketing or product management would like to get answered.
And so when we do talk about, we're talking about storytelling here, and we don't obviously mean storytelling in the sense of, once upon a time and you're putting the kids to bed. You're talking about storytelling here in a business context. So how would you define storytelling in that context? Because for myself, when I first, we spoke about this and discussed this topic, storytelling for me immediately just makes me think of, like novels and narratives. How do you translate that into a business setting, especially when you're dealing with research?
Yeah. So in short, a story, when we just talk about the story first, so what is the story? You mentioned this once upon a time. That's exactly, it's not about once upon a time. But of course, the story is about a problem worth being resolved. So that is the first thing. Then the second thing is the search for a solution is very, very important in a story, which then hopefully enables a meaningful transformation, because in the end, it's about change. And when we talk about data storytelling, that's really a method for communicating information tailored to a specific audience with a compelling narrative. So it's still a narrative that is important. However, that means in the end, it's the last couple of feet of a data analysis journey. So it's probably a little bit the opposite of just visualizing, as I mentioned before, all data available. That's probably a starting point. But then you need to condense and focus more and more of the content so that it can really answer very, very specific business questions. And when we talk a little bit about this technique, it's probably storytelling means answering the last why in a row of a couple of whys.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the 5 whys method, which was originally introduced by Toyota in the quality management concept. And we all know children, and there is an age where they ongoingly ask why, which sometimes gets on our nerves. However, it's a very, very good method to really learn things. And we can apply the same method to storytelling, because in the end, as I said, the more often you ask why, the more you get really to this true cause of something, which in the end is the insight.
Yeah.
And that is the definition of the term insight. So it's a true cause of a trend, of maybe, a deviation. And in conjunction then with linking these findings to an existing business object, that is then what makes it in the end actionable, helping everyone in an organization from frontline to C-level, of course, also implementing quite meaningful actions, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about the storytelling, we mentioned in the introduction that you currently you lead the product at Prezi within Confirmit. How do you then marry this school of thought to the visualization element? So you take these ideas of the problem, the solution, the transformation. Mm-hmm. How is that then visualized in a way that hopefully I guess is maybe a step away from just having plain old bar charts or graphs like you might have seen before?
Yeah. So that leads us a little bit to what probably makes a good story. And of course, first of all, a good story is about the interest of the reader and not the storyteller, for sure. So that's why it's so important to not just look at the questionnaire and visualize all questions captured. So it's more, we need to understand the underlying business questions that seek for answers, and which were probably also the trigger for creating a survey. And a good story is really about the audience. A second thing is the audience need to be able to identify with the story, which basically means it needs to have some heroes. Mm-hmm. And heroes are things like a key performance indicator. So something which I can influence, however, where I also maybe benefit from. So when the performance improves, I might get my bonus. And the more I have of these kind of measures involved in my stories, the more I am involved in the story. And then, of course, a good story always, so to say, show the reader what is happening, as well as how the particular situation developed. And of course, which challenges, and we all love those stories where a hero has a challenge and he needs to master it. And that is, again, about a measure having a challenge. Like maybe your churn rate increased, and now that is your hero, so the churn rate. And now you need to find ways how this hero can master the challenge. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, a good story should always inspire. Inspiring means, in the end, you need to think a little bit ahead. It's not just about telling you what happened, but of course also what will happen and maybe what should happen. So we also need to talk about predictive and prescriptive analytics. And last but not least, and this is my word, it's visual. And visual in this case, as you mentioned, it's not just about the bar charts, mm-hmm. which is nice. However, it's still very abstract, and sometimes it's very hard if you look at especially a visualization or a dashboard that just contains different graphs. It's so difficult to, on the one hand, understand where to act first, because we can't act on all the facts at the same time. So we need to prioritize. So that's one thing. So a good story helps you to identify the priority and to get the sense of where urgency is maybe required. But then it also, and that is where infographic storytelling is a good solution, is where you start to visualize cause and effect, because that is exactly about the different whys I mentioned earlier. You mm-hmm. want to have, so to say, the root to the root cause, and want to, really step by step understand the next why. And a good infographic can help you here a lot. Then, of course, and that's why I love this infographic storytelling, it's also about displaying information depending on its importance. Because sometimes when you look at some dashboards, they just show all the information probably in the same size, which sometimes, of course, might lead the audience into the wrong direction, because they maybe feel, okay, that seems to be important because it uses quite a lot of the space available. However, a good storytelling infographic is more about making also this information or using the space in a way that it supports the audience in understanding what's important and what is not important.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it can use things like illustrations, so understanding principles, and of course, can use photos and icons to basically engage and also visualize the reality, so to say, so that the link between the abstract facts and the real object is easier. And then, of course, last but not least, and that is always important when you talk about data storytelling. Of course, in case I'm an author and I write a story, I can have a happy end. However, we all know when we do data storytelling, sometimes there's a negative story, but of course that can be very productive too. So
sometimes it's a tragedy. Yeah.
Exactly. That. So I think it's important to understand that you never know where the story ends when you do data storytelling, and you also need to accept that sometimes there is not at all a happy end.
So can you give us and I know do apologize to listeners as well, because I know this is an audio format and we're talking a lot about visual storytelling here. But could you perhaps give us an example or a case study where you use these techniques to to provide insights to a client, like whether it was a happy ending or whether it was a tragedy as well?
So basically, it's understanding cause and effect. So that is of course the core of a good story. And just there are various examples, but just let's pick one which is probably pretty simple, which is about let's talk about customer experience management.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, we know the overall satisfaction or the overall experience is driven by all the small experiences a customer has along the customer journey. So when we start there and just keep it simple, we just start with the experience of all the touch points. And then we know, of course, all the different touch points have a different impact on the overall satisfaction. Some are important, some are probably less important. Sometimes we even know that combinations of touch points are important to drive satisfaction. So if I now help someone to first of all understand, okay, in a visual way, okay, these are the touch points you can influence and these are the ones you need to take care of. I can, in a very visual way, help him to understand the different impacts so that it's not abstract and maybe not just, by showing a weight. So you can visually show, okay, this is important by, emphasizing in a visual way, by using more contrast, for instance, or whatever you want to use to point out, oh, this is an important touch point you need to take care of. Then, of course, you can consider some kind of flow chart. So you have all these touch points. Now, all these touch point experiences, of course, in the end, drive the overall experience or overall satisfaction. And then you can consider, well, overall satisfaction, of course, probably drives things like, of course, recommendation, where we maybe also have things like NPS involved, but also things like cross-buying. So you can probably imagine that the more satisfied people are, the more they buy. So also the repurchase rate will probably increase, but also maybe the emotional bonding increases. So then you have, so to say, a next step. And then maybe you define loyalty as something like a combination of emotional bonding, recommendation, and maybe repurchase. Right. So, and now suddenly, if you look at the KPI loyalty and you suddenly understand, okay, well, I have an issue there. You basically can step back and then you ask the why question. So, why is the loyalty index maybe dropping? And then you identify, oh, it's the emotional bonding that was heavily affected, unfortunately, in a negative way. And then you can, of course, understand, okay, what happened with the overall satisfaction? And then you can go one step further. You can ask, okay, what are the touch points has driven the decrease of the overall satisfaction, etc., etc. So that is a very simple example. Another maybe simple example is just talking about revenue, just hard facts, and then just considering, okay, you have traffic, so visitors in your store, you have a conversion rate, meaning how many of these visitors buy a good, and then you have, of course, an average sales check. And we can assume that if you take traffic times conversion rate times average sales check, then you get the revenue. So that's pure math. However, then, of course, if you identify that the conversion rate is low or drop, then you can, of course, look into, okay, what caused that? So you ask the why. Why did that happen? And then it's mainly, and that is a cool thing with market research data. Market research data can answer in a very good way a lot of the whys. So now let's assume you have done some in-store survey and you ask people why they purchased, why they haven't purchased. And let's assume you have a couple of items asked. And then two of them is, one is the product range wasn't perfect. So they expected maybe more variety, but couldn't find the product they were looking for. And there's another one which is maybe like a product availability. So that the product they wanted to purchase wasn't just in stock. So now you can ask the next why, asking, okay, why wasn't the product in stock? So then you immediately get maybe to a supply chain system and supply chain data, asking yourself, okay, were there any issues with delivery or even with the manufacturing process, etc.? So this is the storytelling technique. So you start with the revenue, you identify, okay, it's a conversion rate. Then you see, okay, it's most likely the product not being available. Then you ask, okay, what was the reason for that, and so on and so on. And that leads you in the end to the true insight, which is important to really come up with actions and fuel the actions and improve your business.
And in all of these, the examples you gave just then, we start from the point of data, right? In a kind of abstract sense. And data, as you mentioned, then you gave the example of perhaps an in-store survey, but the sources of data that we have today and the amount of data that is available to researchers and in society at large generally has increased dramatically in very recent history. So in your experience, how has this impacted your work, your ability to generate these meaningful insights? And is it helpful? Can it be a hindrance when you have so much data that you can pull from? Or does it make your life easier or harder to have all this data available?
Well, the answer is probably it depends.
Already. Diplomatic answer, yeah.
In general, of course, the more data available, the more likely you get to a really great story because you really can get to the bottom of things. Because as I mentioned in the previous example, where you start with the hard facts like bottom line results, and you have things like a conversion rate. Then you maybe have a questionnaire asking about the reasons why people couldn't convert to a buyer, and then you suddenly end up maybe in a supply chain database, so to say, trying to understand why there were some issues with product delivery. So that is, of course, a cool thing. So and this is why I love all these new data sources available, and it's a great mixture of survey data, but then also, of course, on more transactional data. So I think asking the why and having the ability to ask why quite often is much easier when you have more data available. However, and that is the challenge here. It requires to break down all the data silos. And that is, from my perspective, still an interesting exercise. Probably not to say sometimes a true hurdle, or at least a big challenge for companies to break them really down. But it offers exactly these big opportunities, so that the more you can break down silos and the more you can use the data available in the entire company, the better the stories. And especially when we talk about changing actions or changing habits on all levels of a company. So the better the full picture is available, of course, the better the actions.
It's an interesting point you mentioned there with regards to silos. I mean, one of the things that we look at a lot in Esomar, myself coming from a kind of legal background, when we talk about combining data sets, it does come with a negative connotation when you look at it from that perspective. But from your point of view, conducting this research and turning it into these actionable insights, what benefits do you get when you can really, as you said, break down these data silos and pull together different types of data that perhaps previously you weren't able to? How does that aid you in getting to these insight, these story moments for your clients?
Yeah, so in general, I think that we, to some extent, when we just look at one data source and just look at a survey, for instance, then we of course, we can also tell a great story with just one survey. You can also tell a great story with just one other data source. Yeah, so data scientists are great at doing this, and in many cases, one, and especially when the questionnaire was done in a very, very good way and was already having a business question in mind, then it's probably enough sometimes to just have this one really good data source. Because of course, data are breaking down the data size, so that sounds so easy, of course, because it's just, just let's talk and let's, let's
swap all our data.
Exactly. Let's take all the data and put that into one data warehouse or data lake, whatever, and life will be better. No, it's not at all that easy. So basically, of course, it requires probably an appropriate thinking, some skills, and of course some technology. So when we talk about the thinking, it's the first thing, and that is probably one of the side effects of breaking down data silos. Is people start more thinking of data as being an asset than just being cost. And I think that is something which is important because the data needs to be maintained and, of course, nurtured. And in the end, you need to create this single source of truth, as I call it. Basically meaning you bring all the data together and it's reliable, it's quality, proven, so that you can make sure, yes, that's a data that we can rely on, which is also very, very helpful when you consider more data sources, because then you really need to think of data catalogs. You need to really dig into, okay, what can this data be used for? And the more you start thinking of that, the more you also identify potential gaps in your data landscape, which you then can start to fill, because we also know that not all the data is available immediately, even if I can pay for it. So sometimes you need to just start creating or generating or capturing the data. So this is where I feel like that when we talk about multiple data sources, that this thinking can help a lot to really make sure that an entire organization starts to become more data empowered or more fact based.
Yeah.
Of course, it requires a lot of skills, and that is sometimes a challenge, and that's what I experience. So yes, we talk about data and here's a data source and there's a data source. However, having access to the data, and now really talking about the technical access, so not the intellectual access, which is also one challenge, of course, but managing data, making sure that you have the right data quality, that the data also suits your business question, so that it is representative, for instance, and sometimes when we talk about social media, yes, it's cool to include social media, but for instance, if I'm a pharmaceutical manufacturer and I'm selling drugs to 80 plus, then probably I can't expect that they're all on social media already.
Yeah.
Which maybe make then this data source a little bit challenging, so to say. However, if I have, of course, goods which is sell to the use, then it's probably absolutely the right data source. And of course, sometimes the big challenge is about setting up all the ETL processes. So that is, in my experience, one of the biggest challenges when we talk about breaking down data silos and using the data in storytelling. That in the end, you need to extract the data that is required. Most of you need to transform it so that you can use it in the right way. However, if you have done it and if the data is available, then of course the entire business can speed up when it comes to decision making. Because then everyone realized you don't have any more these discussions in meetings where the first 30 minutes of the discussion is about, okay, which value is the correct one? Do we have that value available? Is that really is that really true, so to say? And I think the more we invest in making sure we have this central hub of data available, and this is what we're working on at Confirmit to make sure that we have this central hub. We call it Smart Hub, which is able to store all the data, and where you as a company can make sure that all the data is reliable and can be then used by everyone in the organization in a very easy way. And that, again, supports, and that is another upside of breaking down data silos. It immediately can also support the democratization of data, so allowing everyone in the organization, to some extent at least, to deal with data.
It's a fascinating, and you mentioned there, some of the difficulties of, I guess you said technically, but also intellectually. And I'm feeling a bit of that now, because I think in my head this world of data and this concept of storytelling are two separate entities. And we've been speaking about it in a business context, and I've also noticed, and others listeners may have noticed this as well, in recent years, particularly over the past year or so, there has been this trend looking at things like social media, looking at platforms like YouTube, or even series on streaming platforms like Netflix, for example, who take data and then present it in this visualized, in this kind of storytelling manner, and it seems to be resonating with people. So this is, even outside of the business context, we're seeing this storytelling approach, which is pulling actual data and hard numbers and presenting them in a creative way, really getting through. And from your perspective, do you think we're seeing this as a fairly conscious move, to this storytelling approach, instead of where we were maybe 5 or 10 years ago when things were very purely data and numerically driven? What is the appeal, do you think, from the audience's side, whether it's a business audience or the general public as well, if you're trying to engage them and educate them on a given topic?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I'm still fascinated of market researchers that can look at a huge crosstab and immediately identify what's important.
Yeah.
So that always impressed me, because I started my career when the first data visualization tools were available. So I'm a very visual person, and of course, when I now look at, for instance, my son, who is 22 years, but also when I look at my niece, she is just 7 years old, and of course they grew up with totally different technologies, and I think social media, of course, and how we deal with social media changes more and more the way we want to consume information. And I think you mentioned YouTube, for instance. I think that is a very good example. In the past, so to say, and when I was basically, at school, and then of course at university, I used books to learn. However, when I look at my son today, he's basically watching YouTube videos when he wants to learn something. And there's so much, of course, available, and you can basically find an answer to everything.
Yeah.
And I think that is something we definitely need to consider, that the next generation, and I sometimes call it the YouTube generation, wants to consume data in a totally different way. So it must be more infotainment-like. So it's not just the abstract information, but it needs to be presented in a nice way, and with some kind of narrative arc. Of course, sometimes it needs to be probably more spot on. So so less about explaining every detail. It's something really focused. And of course, when we look a little bit into the future and we see all these platforms, we can of course assume that the future of data visualization, and then even data storytelling, becomes more like on the one hand, short video stories. So I can imagine that one day we don't really look at charts and have them, so to say, ordered in a narrative arc, but that a business analyst or data scientist, starts to work with the data. He, of course, still visualizes the data because it's a way to reveal things. However, then he starts to of course, assemble all the different views on the data into a narrative arc. But then maybe he just comments with an audio about, and talks about what made him feel, to analyze this data, what the reason was, what kind of assumptions he said, what his findings are, what he probably recommends. And then instead of sending someone a deck or doing a live presentation, which is of course still possible, however, he then just sends maybe a 2-minute video to someone, which then can be easily shared with others. And that's of course about the upside of stories. Stories can be shared. Yeah. And then they get viral, so to say, and they can be used in the entire organization. Of course, in case they are good. But that is what probably will change more and more. That instead of decks or of course web presentations, we probably see more and more short videos, answering a particular business question on the spot and in a very, very entertaining way. Another future could be things using augmented reality techniques, which is also quite interesting when it comes to storytelling, because just imagine augmented reality basically is about overlaying facts into the real world, and just imagine you have, for instance, a hotel and you have your iPad and you walk through with your tablet through the hotel, and you can look at the reception, and then as soon as the iPad so to say looks at the reception, you immediately get the latest results, how satisfied were people with the check-in, friendliness, etc., and that is of course something which can be pretty interesting, because suddenly you make everyone more involved into the data, even though that are not attracted by data and analytics, and then you can even go one step further and blend education into the fact. So meaning that, for instance, if people complained about how, let's say, the reception staff handled their complaints, then you can have, of course, directly embedded training videos so that the staff can not just hear about and from customers how these customers felt while complaining about something, but they can also immediately in the same platform learn about how to better handle these kind of complaints. And I think this is where storytelling will heading, because in the end, it's the story is about helping us also to execute and do the change.
And it's keeping the eye on the future. One we're looking at. So you mentioned younger generations who, of course, are getting increasingly reliant on and growing up with these more visual means of absorbing information and education. So how do you think that's going to inform the next generation of market researchers who are coming through in terms of how they approach a similar kind of client briefs to what you may receive today? And I guess as well as that, you mentioned AR, just then augmented reality as a potentially useful technology. Are there other technologies, and I'm thinking in particular here of the big buzzword of today, which is AI, so artificial intelligence or machine learning. How do you see that kind of technology factoring into the future work of market researchers who may want to embrace these storytelling ideas?
Yep. So I probably see, of course, 3 important capabilities a future researcher should have, and probably there are more. But from my perspective, I think it's, of course, on the one hand, visualization and infographic design, because it's less about the abstract facts. It's more really making information appealing and easy to read. And as I said, also showing a cause and effect in a visual way, so that information is more intuitive. So it's less about really the hard work to try to read the chart and trying to get the essence of a chart. So, and I think this is where infographic storytelling can be very, very helpful. You mentioned AI and machine learning. So in general, I think it's more about advanced analytics that is very important for the future researcher. And that can be then, to some extent, of course, or the researcher can be then in the end supported by AI or some machine learning algorithms. However, the analytics behind all this is probably known for a couple of decades. But it's more like machine learning and AI can help the researcher to much faster reveal what's important. So revealing the insight so that the researcher has more time to think of, on the one hand, the narrative, which then is the third capability. So being able to create a narrative and help the C-level, but also other levels in the organization to really execute on the results.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the all these techniques will shift a little bit the work. So it will be less about producing tables and then producing charts and then sending decks and then maybe summarizing a little bit the research. It will be really more about short but very, very visual stories, supported by the right analytics, and then helping the customer to transform the findings into executable actions.
And I guess just on one final note, building on that thought, if we, for our listeners who are checking out this episode, who might work in the research sector and who may be interested in trying out to some of these techniques, are there any special, particular points of advice that you would give, or any resources maybe that you can recommend for people who might want to, take what they may be doing with numerical data and use these storytelling techniques that you've described to us today? Is there anything in particular that they should look for?
I think first of all, we talked about data silos. So the first thing I think is really systematically seek for additional data sources, and go beyond the survey data. And there are 4 categories of data, just to mention. So owned, earned, paid, and public data. So you can search internally. So for owned data, so the data you really own as an enterprise or company. So that's mainly transactional data, your finance data. That's your own data. Then you can probably look into the earned data, which and we all know, customer data, for instance. So all the data we have from customers, like the PII, all this is earned because, as we know from GDPR, they only borrow us that information. This is why it's earned. And the more we take care of them, the probably more they're willing to share additional information with us, which then can help us, of course, to make smarter decisions. Then, of course, we have the paid data for sure. Market research data is the paid data. And last but not least, we have public data. So there are great data sources on the market that can be used. Sometimes public data doesn't mean you don't need to pay. That's important to know. But in general, it's public available. However, of course, we also know that own data is, of course, the one where you can differentiate most because none of your competitors probably has that own data. However, public data is available for everyone. So I think the first thing is really to create some kind of data landscape, as I call it. So you or data map maybe. So where you really start, okay, this is my survey data and what maybe influences this data. So are there any other data sources like weather data, for instance? Weather data is a great data source. So 80% of companies are directly impacted by weather. So that is really interesting. So to use as to understand what could have driven a specific trend. However, then of course you can also look into other data sources to measure maybe the outcomes like norms, benchmarks, etc., etc. So I think it's about really starting to think beyond the survey data, look at what data is available. Of course, always immediately also check the quality of the data, and then really start working on additional data sources. Because yes, all the data is available, but in most cases, it either lacks the quality or it needs to be transformed. And the sooner you start with that approach, the more you can make sure that in the future, the data has the right quality, and because people take more care of entering the right data, taking care of entering the data in the right way. And then, of course, you can even start capturing additional data. So that is one important thing for me. So really start looking beyond survey data only. Another one is, I think, and I touched it already a little bit, it's about data being an asset.
Mm-hmm.
Some call it, it's in your oil. I don't really like that. But it translates probably pretty well. We need to take care of our data. We need to maintain it. We need to nurture it. We shouldn't list it in a data catalog. So I don't want to know how many data or files and databases are somewhere on file servers.
Yeah.
Like SPSS data files here and some Excel files over there. And no one really knows what they are about. Maybe they at least know, okay, that was a survey, but the context of the survey, what was the underlying business question, who was asked, etc., etc. So I think creating a data catalog helps a lot to make sure that you really build this asset, and that the data is easily found and is, of course, also accessible. And this now is really about intellectual accessibility, because I really understand what's in the data. Then, of course, you need to train people. And we all know that we can't have one business analyst or a couple of business analysts or data scientists just do all the work. That will just create a huge backlog. So what we need to make sure is we need to enable the entire organization to be more fact-based. So we need to increase data literacy. And I think that is, by the way, a second interesting future challenge for market researchers. So to help their customers to become more data literate, to increase the data literacy, which basically means that, yes, in the past, as I mentioned, they deal with a market researcher, knowing every detail, knowing all the, method, and et cetera, et cetera. However, now we're subtly dealing with people that are not attracted by data and analytics, but need to deal with data because, decision-making needs to become faster, and more decisions need to be made. So in the end, we need to empower and enable everyone in the organization to do this. So this is probably a very important part. And then, of course, to help people to get into the storytelling concept, that it always starts with a problem first. Then it tries to understand the problem by asking 5 times why. Can be sometimes 7 times, can be sometimes only 3 times, but 5 times. Good average. Then coming up with a solution which shows, on the one hand, maybe the alternatives, the different paths I can now take. And then, of course, comes up with a good recommendation. And that's, in the end, a good story. I think what is also important is, in the end, about focusing a little bit less on reporting. Reporting is a little bit too much about the past sometimes. And I think we should really go beyond that and do the root cause, explaining the why, as I mentioned, but also talk about what will happen and what should happen. So looking into predictive and prescriptive analytics, and then use infographic storytelling to visualize all this. And probably last but not least, and you asked for some kind of maybe books or other sources available. There's a small book available which I wrote a couple of years ago, which is 5 Steps to Compelling Dashboard Design, which talks about a funnel, and I developed a couple of years ago a so-called dashboard funnel, which can be used as a visualization funnel, which has 5 steps. So the first thing is it's about appeal. So information needs to be appealing so that it attracts people to go one step further. The next step is about it must be self-explanatory. So people need to easily get the data because, when I provide data to someone and I'm not present because I'm not presenting, because I'm just offering it, all the information through a dashboard, I need to have everything as easy to read and interpret as possible because there is no help available. Next level is then it needs to be meaningful. As I mentioned earlier, that it's important to that information is really for me and that I am affected by this information, so to say. Then it needs to be actionable. So we need to link all the findings we have to business objectives. That is very, very important for a good story. And last but not least, the good story is also about being memorable. So memorable today also means it's shareable. So that the story is of course easy to share it so that more people in our organization benefit from the story and start changing their habits, start changing processes so that business can be improved.
Fantastic. Well, I think plenty to unpack there, and a really interesting look at what could be a very interesting direction for the future of the research sector. So, Alexander, thank you very much for taking the time to join us and to share your experience and share your insights on this technique. And excited to see how it develops from here as well.
Thank you too. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I think there's a lot to come, especially as you mentioned with AI having to some extent the impact on storytelling as well, because maybe one day we see AIs that write good stories. Who knows?
We'll see. There might be a lot of angry authors when that day comes. So we'll let's wait and see. Alexander, thank you very much again. Once again, I'd like to thank the sponsors for this week's episode, Confirmit. Confirmit solutions are built by insights professionals for insights professionals. Market research, customer experience, and employee engagement consultants who work around the world and rely on its solutions to turn insights into stories that fuel action. At the heart of Confirmit's business are the people behind its technology who will work as a partner to develop the flexibility and power a clients need to understand and manage experiences, emotions, and behaviors so you're always one step ahead. You can find out more about Confirmit by clicking the link in the episode description. And as always, thank you to our listeners for joining us again for this episode. I do hope you've enjoyed the discussion. I hope you've learned something new, some new skills perhaps that you can try, and I look forward to welcoming you again next time. If you enjoyed the show, please do follow us on your listening platform of choice. And of course, if you have any ideas for the show, you can contact us via podcast@esomar.org. Until the next time, please do stay safe, stay healthy, and most of all, stay curious. Thank you, and we'll see you again in the next one.